we sort of go back into the mists of time, really, in the early chapters of Genesis almost. We were elected to General Synod in 1985 together, and we were young then, weren't we? And well, he's aged much better than me, but over to you, Peter.
Right, thank you very much. Well, look, I want to drill down more deeply into the issues that Bobby Lopez has raised there and look at some of the research that he touched upon. Recent research on parenting. Until recently, it was well established that the two-parent, heterosexual, married household produced greater stability and social benefits for children compared with single, adoptive, cohabiting, or divorced parenting. That was just taken as read. All the evidence points in that direction, and you can measure this sort of thing quite easily with looking at the educational achievements, behavioral problems, emotional well-being. And generally it was felt that this is because of the stability of the family, which was the key factor. There were probably a few dinosaurs out there who thought it might have something to do with male and female complementarity, but I couldn't possibly comment. Those of us who believe those things, it's a difficult thing to prove anyway. But now it's claimed that there are no differences, as Bobby Lopez was saying. Over the past 10 years, numerous studies appear to show that there are no differences in the outcome of various family structures. In particular, gay and lesbian parenting has been seen to be as successful as natural parenting. And some studies have shown they do even better than natural parents. In the House of Lords debate on same-sex marriage, medical scientist Lord Winston referred to the work of Professor Susan Gollenbach of Cambridge and said that the evidence she has produced is incontrovertible. And Baroness Stoll, in summing up for the government, said that the research shows that the children of same-sex couples do better than the children of opposite-sex couples. Is it true? These studies have 4 major faults. Their sample sizes are too small to show difference. Secondly, they're not representative samples of the population at large. Thirdly, they do not compare lesbian and gay parenting with stable married parenting. And fourthly, they seek the views of the parents, not the children. Let's look at each of these in turn. The sample sizes, for instance... Sorry? Oh, I see. Yes, it is funny if it's not tragic or something. Susan Gollenbach's study, 33 respondents. Wainwright and co, Wainwright and Patterson, I think that was, 44 respondents. They looked at adolescent children, whereas Gollenbach was looking at young children. Fulcher, just 18 respondents. And that's typical of the sample sizes that these studies involved. Now, small samples cannot reveal statistically significant variations. They lack the statistical power. But we also have the difficult underlying theme that if they're motivated to confirm the null hypothesis that there is no difference, a small sample is ideal for doing that. And that introduces the very real dangers that we're seeing in a number of areas of ideological distorted science. The second issue about non-representative recruitment. There are 2 ways that these studies have by and large been done. One by convenience sampling and the other by snowballing. The idea of snowballing is that you recruit your friends. If you're going to do it, you find other people who are your buddies who will come alongside. Is this really how they select? Yes, it is. Here is an example that's on the website at the moment of a study in progress in Australia, and this is the way the website describes it. Initial recruitment will involve convenient sampling and snowball recruitment techniques which have been successful in other Australian studies. These will include advertisements and media releases in gay and lesbian press, flyers at gay and lesbian social and support groups, investigator attendance at gay and lesbian community events, and lesbian and gay community email lists aimed at same-sex parenting. Convenient samples like these cannot be compared to the random population. You can't generalize from your findings. The appeal, in this case fairly obviously, is to more educated people who exercise deliberative parenting. They probably have greater wealth and greater concern for health. They have greater educational motivation and possibilities. They're more likely to be white and upper middle class, and more likely to be urban dwellers. Let me give you an example. In the 2010 United States Census data suggested that 37% of children in lesbian households are black or Hispanic. In the study that we're going to be looking at in a moment that Bobby Lopez refers to, that was a very large study, and that showed 43% of the children in lesbian households were black or Hispanic. In contrast, in a convenience survey of the National Longitudinal Lesbian Family Study, they showed just 6% of the children were black or Hispanic. You cannot extrapolate from these small samples to the general population. We then ask the question, is no different from what? Such convenience samples compared children with divorced lesbian mothers with children with single or divorced heterosexual mothers. They do not compare them with stable, biologically intact married families. And because these families have all been severely traumatized in one way or another, they've lost by death or divorce or separation, they've lost one of the parents, they're all going to be much more similar to each other, and therefore differences are going to be much more difficult to detect from such comparisons. And fourthly, who's doing the reporting? Small studies are liable to gain recruits who want to document their success at parenting. And this is admitted by one researcher who said, parental self-report may be biased. In a prejudicial social climate, lesbian and gay parents may have more at stake in presenting a positive picture. Parents reported outcomes on the division of labour in the household, the parent-child closeness, daily interaction patterns, gender roles in the family, discipline procedures, record the experience of parents who have children, not the experience of children who have parents. There's a built-in bias asking the parents to assess their own parenting. And usually the children involved in these studies are very young. Gollenbach's 2003 study, they were 7-year-olds. You cannot predict from the state of a happy 7-year-old how they're going to turn out as an adult and what they're going to carry into their adult life. They do not measure how they fare as adults. So 4 major faults. The sample sizes are too small to show difference. They're not representative of the population at large. They're not compared with stable biological families, and they're the views of the parents, not the children. Welcome the New Family Structures Study of 2012. This study was done by Professor Mark Regnerus from the University of Texas, and it uniquely addresses all these issues. There is no other study like this that compares on all these fronts. He did full surveys of nearly 3,000 adults aged 18 to 39, and they were drawn from a random population sample over 15,000. He needed to get the balance of the different family structures represented in the sample that they surveyed. The largest group were intact biological families. And he questioned adult children, now adult children, about their upbringing. The family structures from his number of nearly 3,000 broke down into 919 intact biological families. These children stayed with their own parents for the first 18 years of life. And then the other main groups, adoptive parents, divorce groups, step-parents, single parents. Lesbian mother, this was a point of much controversy and dispute, because the issue here, the question they were asked is, are you aware that either of your parents had a same-sex relationship during your childhood? They weren't asked whether the mother was lesbian and the father was gay, but whether they were aware that such a relationship had taken place. The underlying assumption being is that if somebody had had a transient one-night stand thing, the child is almost certain not to know about that. It would have to be a lasting, substantial relationship for it to register with the child. But that was the question they're asked. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the mother is a lesbian, but did she have a romantic lesbian association during the child's upbringing? As you can imagine from the complexity of family life, there are a lot of people in the survey who didn't fall neatly into any of those categories, so they're listed as also RANs, and there were 400 of them. So you've got 8 structures to compare. And Regnerus did this looking at 40 outcome variables, looking at emotional, relational, and social factors. They included marital status, welfare dependency, employment status, educational attainment, voting, not the way they voted, but whether they voted in the presidential election, whether they'd had suicidal thoughts or needed psychotherapy, what their sexual identity was, whether they'd had same-sex relationships, extramarital affairs, sexually transmitted infections, whether they'd been sexually abused, their closeness to their biological parents, their physical health, their happiness, depression, impulsivity, household income, current relationship quality, drug use, TV use, alcohol use, whether they'd been arrested, whether they'd been convicted for minor offences, the number of male and female sexual partners. And this was, of course, a cross-sectional study. It collected data at that point in time. It didn't follow them up, and quite unable from this data to assess causes. We talked earlier about causes and correlations. This merely establishes correlations. And there are weaknesses to the study. Every study's got its drawbacks. While 919 respondents spent 18 years with their natural parents, only 2 respondents spent 18 years with a lesbian mother, quote, lesbian mother. And none of them who had spent 18 years with a father who'd had a same-sex relationship. And this seems to reflect the instability of these family structures, that they were unable, in that large number of over 15,000 people, to find greater representation of those 2 groups. Another problem is that it is, of course, a study of the past. The study looks back on the upbringing of children up to 39 years previously. These respondents were aged 18 to 39 at the time of the study. And times change, and there are all sorts of issues in our culture and expectations which certain people will be very keen to say that it's going to be very different now in the days of gay marriage. What then were the results? Well, the children of the natural parents did best. There were statistically significant better outcomes in 25 of the 40 variables, compared to the group that did worst, which were the children whose mother had a lesbian relationship. And I think it is very encouraging and an inspiration, particularly, I hope, to Christian people, that adopted children did second best in that score. The statistically significant better outcomes included less welfare in childhood, less current benefits, better employment record, better educational attainment, greater household income, more likely to be heterosexual, fewer affairs, less likely to cohabit, less likely to have been sexually abused, better family security, better physical health, less depression, less relationship problems, less marijuana use, less smoking, less TV seen, fewer arrests, fewer convictions. So Regnerus concludes that the new family structure study clearly reveals that children appear most apt to succeed well as adults on multiple counts and across a variety of domains when they spend their entire childhood with their married mother and father, and concludes that the empirical claim that no differences exist must go. I've got a couple more minutes. If I can just mention some of the flack that was caused by this paper. This paper was explosive. And well, I won't need 10, but I'll take a few of them. Thank you, Peter. There were loud protests. I mean, quite appalling protests. If you read what these people actually wrote, it's devastating. It chills the blood. So much so, I mean, it was published in February 2012 and was promptly withdrawn because of the outrage. It was submitted to an audit panel who took the whole thing apart and looked at the way they chased up the email correspondence, they looked at the way the data was collected, and it was republished by the University of Texas in July with a completely clear bill of health. And Regnerus himself published a detailed rebuttal of these accusations in August 2012. These papers are available on the internet. They're quite easy to find and download. They're available for you to go and do your own study on. What were the accusations that inflamed them so much? Well, one of them was that they were funded by conservative funding organizations, the Witherspoon Institute and the Bradley Foundation. And it's a very expensive study to run, which is why there are so few studies of this size and detail. It was a very big study, cost a lot of money. The question about the funding is not where the money came from, is what they did with it. And they found that the funders had no role in the design of the study or in the conduct of the study. They had no role in its analysis or the interpretation of the data. And they had no role in the preparation of the manuscript. And then there are the complaints that they weren't comparing like with like. There are 18 years with natural parents compared with much shorter periods with those who had gay and lesbian affairs. But the comparison is not with the duration, but with the other family structures, including natural parents who had same-sex relationships. So it wasn't trying to prove and couldn't show like-for-like comparisons in that way. And the instability of same-sex relationships is reflected in the difficulties in finding relationships that lasted.